Okay, good day. Welcome to Utilities Committee, May 1st. We have a one-item agenda. I get a move to approve.
I move to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Okay, any discussion, any corrections? And seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, we have an agenda. We have a one-item agenda amendments to illicit discharges and wellhead protection and critical aquifer recharge areas. I'm assuming you're Doug?
I'm Doug.
Doug, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much.
You got it.
I'm Doug Christensen, Water Resources Engineer in Public Works Water Resources Division. So these are amendments to LMC Title 14 Buildings and Construction, which is has a lot of chapters in it. We're just looking at two of them that have some amendments. Chapter 1429, illicit discharges, and 1436, wellhead protection and critical aquifer recharge areas. So I was going to go through just briefly the purpose of those two chapters, then the basis for the code amendments that are being proposed, and then we'll look in a little more detail at the key updates and the rationale for them in each of the chapters. So the purpose of these chapters, first of all, 1429, this is wording directly out of the current code. This is existing wording. So to provide for the health, safety, and general welfare of citizens through the regulation of non-stormwater discharges to the municipal storm sewer system, and to control the introduction of pollutants into the city's MS4, which is our municipal drainage system. Prohibit illegal connections and illegal discharges, and to define the city's legal authority to carry out inspections. Chapter 1436, wellhead protection. Purpose is protect the public's health, safety, and welfare by protecting our drinking water source, and to protect the quality of groundwater and prevent contamination of our drinking water. So the basis for the code amendments, it's the usual culprit. Every time I bring something to this committee, it's because of our Western Washington Phase 2 municipal stormwater permit, which dictates virtually everything we do in stormwater management. This permit is issued by Department of Ecology, regulates drainage discharges. It applies all over Western Washington. So we're not alone. Jurisdictions all over Western Washington are having to meet the standards established by the permit. The current permit went into effect in mid-2019 and goes through the middle of next summer. And then we'll have a new permit issued. And there's all sorts of requirements for compliance with the permit. Two of those many requirements are the reason for these amendments that I'm bringing to you here. So first of all, we have section S5C6 of the permit, which required us to update our local stormwater regulations. We did that last year. I brought to council in June our 2022 stormwater design manual update, and that was adopted and went into effect the 1st of July last summer. That had updated design criteria and requirements that were required through the permit and through Ecology's Western Washington Stormwater Manual. And also some terminology updates, which I'll explain more in a moment. The second one is section S5C8 of the permit, which requires us to implement a new source control program for existing development. So under this, there are 4 requirements that were detailed in the staff report. The first is an ordinance that requires the application of source control BMPs. Source control meaning preventing pollutants from contaminating rainwater at the source. So if you have a pile of dirt, the rain hits it and the dirt washes off, you want to prevent that from happening to keep the rainwater as clean as possible, right? So that's what that source control refers to. So we have an ordinance, and then you have to establish an inspection program, an inventory of businesses, and to apply progressive enforcement. So we've got an inventory of businesses and we have an inspection program underway.
What is progressive enforcement?
Well, we'll talk more about that in a moment too, but basically it means we don't throw the book at you right out of, for a first offense. If somebody has a pollution problem on their site, we don't jump to monetary penalties. We start with, a kinder, gentler approach to enforcement. But if a site is non-cooperative, then it progresses. And
So work with a little bit of education, work with, here's the rules, please put these in place and then continue to monitor.
Do we have any current commercial sites or business owners that are a cause for concern for stormwater?
I don't know, because our inspection program we're getting it set up now.
Good.
And I'm not out there inspecting, so I'm not aware of any.
Are you aware of any?
We've had some issues, especially the last winter with some active construction sites and now existing commercial built sites. Not aware of any that have been having problem with source control, but active construction sites, it's a continual process. In community economic development, we have a individual that specializes in stormwater inspections and best management. So he's out there well in advance of the rainy seasons, talking with them, making sure they're working with their CISOs, their designated site persons, responsible for site control, erosion control, getting them queued up and then monitoring during the winter. And if they have a blow up, then they're adding more preventative measures to the site. So that we do have an active enforcement program, inspection and enforcement.
So for the most part, people are compliant, but we have had some significant issues. There was a small business, scuba diving business, sold, lead weights. And they would process the lead in their shop and take the wastewater, which, which contained lead,
Oh,
which is
gosh,
bad stuff, and go dump it into our storm.
Oh, wow.
And so obviously they were being secretive about
Sure,
it, but
sure.
when when we became aware of it, obviously it falls under this, and that was pretty significant. And then there's sometimes it's just cases where the way, say, oils and different waste products are stored, and then like one time we had where it's extreme rainfall event, they're storing them in open top barrels over top. So it filled the barrel over topped and
Right.
and down. So most people want to do it right and are compliant, but occasionally,
Occasionally get the bad apples.
yeah.
And same with our construction sites,
Yep.
those who are doing it right. And sometimes they have these blowouts and it's a matter of active enforcement.
Okay. Sorry to disrupt your role there.
No, that's discussion's part of it. Okay, so for these amendments, the purpose then is compliance with the state municipal stormwater permit, consistency with our other regulations, in particular our stormwater design manual, and then some other terminology, wording updates and clarifications throughout both of these codes. So in 1429 illicit discharges, we have definitions that have been updated for consistency with the stormwater manual. And then we have the source control inspection and enforcement wording that we've adjusted, shall I say. We already had wording in there, but we've adjusted it to be fully compliant with what the permit requires for that new source control program. And in the 1436, we also have definitions that were updated for consistency with our stormwater manual, and also with the underground injection control section of our stormwater manual, particularly the deep UICs, as we call them, for protection of groundwater. So we'll go through these in a little more detail. First, 1429 for a few slides. So we amended the definitions to be consistent with ecology. Well, it's ecology, and then we updated our stormwater manual for consistency with ecology. Now we're updating these codes to be consistent with both, essentially. And then the source control inspection and enforcement wording. So the main changes in the illicit discharge chapter are in the definitions, the source control, and the enforcement sections. So we'll run through these, look at in a little bit of detail here. So under the definitions, they were updated for consistency with our manual and added a definition for source control EMP, which was not actually in there before, but so that's basically the same definition that we have in our stormwater manual. Now we have in here also. And then also revised illicit discharge and illicit connection so that they match what Ecology's definitions that we adopted in our manual. So those definitions are consistent.
So when the average resident is, say, washing their car and the water from that effort discharges into our drain, is that a cause for concern?
Yes, that's an illicit discharge.
It is an illicit discharge.
Because it's not clean rainwater.
Okay,
Our guidance is that they wash it on their property, preferably on the lawn. You don't want to drive your vehicle on the lawn, but if you're like me, you have a driveway that's all cracked, it'll infiltrate there and it won't go into the municipal storm system.
so if you drive through Horizon Point, most of the residents there don't have that luxury. They can't pull into their front yard and wash their car. There's not enough space. It's just not designed that way. And then you have to be concerned with some of them will have sprinkler systems. So are folks, do they have to resort to going to a professional car wash?
That would probably be the simplest. I suppose if they were like create an elaborate berm system around the vehicle and collect the water and put it into the wastewater system, that would get you around not violating the ordinance.
That seems a little over the top.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So if their home property doesn't allow for car washing, the alternative, simplest one is probably go to a recycled water type car wash.
So a number of years ago, this came up and we said, we're not gonna go out and ticket and enforce people for washing their car.
Right.
It's kind of like baseball and apple pie.
Yeah.
And but we encourage people, if possible, like.
But we're on a progressive scale with enforcement.
Right, so the first step, we would talk to them and say, well, did you know this isn't a good thing? We're not gonna ticket you, but you should be washing it in the street. And they'll say, what am I supposed to do? You have to have an answer.
What if they want to, well, gosh, we can go, that's a pretty deep rabbit hole.
Most of the time, it's going to be getting this information out to the public through either our utility bill and says, hey, these are best practices and those type of things. But as Scott said, we're not out there driving around.
Not yet, anyway.
But there are some situations, residential neighbors outside of car washing. There was a time where somebody was putting in a new driveway, they hosed off to expose the aggregate.
Yeah.
And it ran down for about, several blocks. You can find the stream of concrete. Those are those type of things that a little bit different, but there are different aspects of enforcement and education.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It all starts with education, just making people aware why it's an issue and to.
Well, my concern is where this is leading to. It's, people are gonna do what they're going to do,
Right.
whether intentionally or not.
Right.
It wasn't my intention to pollute the environment by washing my car. So there's that. I don't know.
So if you can, wash it on the lawn or take it to a car wash. It's what's preferred, or on gravel even. So under section 142907 is for source control requirements. We already had this in place for our stormwater source control program. We anticipated it, so we had wording in there. So in blue, we have some adjustments to the wording. It clarifies it and uses Ecology's terminology. For example, it refers to structural and non-structural source control EMPs. We changed that to structural and operational because that's Ecology's preferred wording for it. So for source control, there's structural things you can do. Build a roof over something to keep the rain from hitting it, for example. And then there's operational things you can do, which is practices, actual actions rather than structures. So both are included. And then the last part of this that we added wording that outreach, education, and technical assistance may be provided by the city upon reasonable request. So again, we're not trying to come out and be heavy-handed with enforcement, but we want people to understand the situation and work with us to get in compliance. The wording in the inspections and monitoring section was also, there was some wording added to help clarify this. Again, we had wording in there already about, accessing property for doing inspections, but we put in a few examples so it clarifies what we're looking for. If we come on to look at things, this is what we're looking for. And then the enforcement wording amended for compliance with the permit. The permit requires us to implement a progressive enforcement policy. We already had a policy that is virtually the same thing, but it was called escalating enforcement. It's a comparable term, so we just changed it to progressive, so it would be, it would equal ecology's preferred wording. Yeah. So this explains it in a little more detail than the code section already did.
Hey Doug, this is Carolyn. Can I ask a question about that? Is the progressive enforcement, well, let's say you had just a terrible violation going on and it was flagrant. Would we have to start small or could we go to maximum?
Even in those cases, we start by contacting them. That's the outreach. And then educating them to make sure that they understand why it's a problem. So we still start there and give them a chance to get in compliance.
Okay.
So please clarify. My son, I think, and Councilmember Cox, please jump in if I'm wrong. I don't want to put words in your mouth. But let's take the example of the scuba shop. They violated the law. So we can go directly to the most highest level of enforcement immediately, right?
We can, yes.
Yeah.
And we also had that with the scuba shop. They had done a similar operation in Pierce County. Got shut down there, moved to our jurisdiction and resumed operation. So they knew better.
Right. Thanks, Scott. The word I was looking for was discretionary, so thank you.
Yeah, it's pretty much case by case, depending on how big a threat it is and what the history is, if there is any, it's all taken into account. So this refers to chapter 1440 LMC, that is actually about civil violations. So it refers to that after describing that we try to use this progressive approach, starting with education and outreach. Okay, amendments to the other chapter 1436 now, wellhead protection and critical aquifer recharge areas. So again, definitions were updated to be consistent with our 2022 stormwater manual. And then sections in this chapter that were updated for consistency with our underground injection control guidance, which is new in our stormwater manuals as new guidance. So this brings us into alignment with that. And there were several sections that we had changes, and I'll run through those. So definitions, dust management practices, which by the way is one of those, it's probably the main terminology change that ecology had. The term facilities, like stormwater facilities, ecology wants us now to call them BMPs, best management practices, which is a broader term. A facility is always a constructed thing, but BMPs can be operational actions that you do. So the word facility has been replaced with BMPs throughout stormwater regulations. So we have that definition that's been altered a little bit, it was updated, I should say. And hazardous materials also, which mentions sections of Washington Municipal Code or WACs.
What is the graph we're looking at?
That is a map of the city of Lacey showing in color the wellhead protection areas for our source wells.
And the different colors mean time of travel to the well. So as you're moving out, you see the colors change. It's more and more time, like 5 year, 1 year, 6 month.
Right, so the pink in the center is the 6 month time of travel. It's a pretty contained area, but then it gets longer time as you move out from it. Longer time for something to reach the well. Okay, a definition was added for stormwater BMP/facility. Here we're kind of making that transition from facility to BMP. But both terms still occur in the codes, so that was added. And then the underground injection control well definition was updated. In the section on uses and activities, this was updated for consistency. What we use for city projects is what's called an SPCC plan on our capital projects, which is defined by WashDOT. It's a spill control and countermeasures plan. The wording we had in this chapter already was kind of vague. It referred to an undefined spill control and prevention plan, which had really no clear criteria with it. So this is updated to something that does have clear criteria. And then the landscaping and irrigation section there was added for sites that are within wellhead protection area to use integrated pest management, which has been it's been in stormwater management world for a long time, but it wasn't clearly specified in our code here. So that's been added. It's been in our stormwater manual for at least a dozen years, and I think probably longer. This section 1436.130 was redundant with the section that follows it. So this section, this little short section on special reports for critical aquifer recharge areas is being deleted. It's incorporated in the section that immediately follows. So by deleting that, it changes the numbering of everything after the section. Let's see, this is 1436.170 wellhead protection area standards. So this again updated for consistency with our underground injection control guidance in the stormwater manual and to protect our groundwater. The main changes we have. Number 4 referred to gas stations and petroleum storage and so forth. So the gas stations was pulled out and put into its own line here. So part A5 is now retail gas stations and fueling, any sort of a fueling station or mobile fueling of commercial or residential vehicles, which is an emerging. We see that as an emerging threat for spills. So within the 1 year time of travel zone, that's that smaller area, those would be prohibited. And then also dry cleaning was clarified with some specific chemicals that are of concern in those 1 year time of travel areas. And standards for new uses. This was updated with the underground injection control wording, again, for consistency with our stormwater manual and the new UIC section. So those are the main changes that are being proposed. There's little wording tweaks in other sections, but those are the main changes that are being proposed in these 2 chapters. So we had a public hearing in January with the Planning Commission. There were no public comments and they recommended adoption to the council. That brings us to today. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Did we have any turnout during the public hearing? Was there any feedback, good, bad, or indifferent?
No.
Any questions from the council committee?
No, I think that was pretty thorough. Thank you, Doug.
Do we know which council meeting it's gonna be at?
Well, we could have it scheduled for the May 18th council meeting or the first council meeting in June. It's a planning commission recommendation, so it will automatically go forward to council as a recommendation from the planning commission.
Perfect. Okay.
We want to make sure that we had opportunity for this committee to have some opportunity to ask questions or get more information.
Good. Anything else for the committee? Thank you, gentlemen, ladies, for being here today. Okay, without anything else left on the agenda, I'll go ahead and call this meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you very much.